on my computer.
There we go.
Our group replicated the study, the effects of video self-evaluation on skill acquisition with yoga postures. I'm Olivia Farrell. The other group members are Andrea Manuel, Jennifer Malema, Pedro Morales, and Chantel Strand. I will now turn it over to Jennifer to go over the abstract of our study.
The study that we chose to replicate was on video self-evaluation and video feedback to increase the accuracy of 3 common yoga poses. The procedure has been effective in other fields in increasing knowledge and productivity of functional living skills.
Why didn't you tell me?
The intervention was, I'm sorry, guys.
Okay.
The intervention was assessed by a single subject design across 5 healthy adult students, and the results demonstrated that video self-evaluation was effective in increasing behaviors needed to perform the poses accurately. And next, Andy will discuss the first 3 articles in our lit review.
All right, so it's long since been an area of concern that there's a gap between what research has proven to be effective as treatment and what's actually being implemented clinically and professionally. What we're hoping to do is, through our literature review and our own replication of this study, is to bridge that gap from video modeling and self-evaluation, especially if it is in fact an effective treatment. As professionals, we can then implement these type of strategies into our staff and client training, and then continue to help others use this treatment if it is proven more effective. Our literature review explored the current findings of the effectiveness of video modeling paired with self-evaluation. And currently there's many different settings that this is being used with clinical treatment, with autism spectrum disorders or other developmental deficits, and it's also used as a professional training tool. You see often in graduate school that the therapist will record themselves and then be evaluated by professors, and also used in behavioral settings. There's also been significant research on the effectiveness of video modeling to teach activities of daily living to individuals with learning and cognitive deficits. However, this is generally not paired with self-evaluation procedures. M. McGraw and some of his colleagues completed research supporting this by using video modeling to assist individuals with traumatic brain injury to acquire cooking skills. The video modeling aspect included the participants to watch videos of themselves completing a cooking task and then receive additional prompting and guidance through difficult aspects of a broken down task analysis. The study actually showed that the 4 participants that were included in the study were able to become proficient at the chosen cooking skill within 4 sessions, and they were able to maintain accuracy when tested after 4 weeks. However, the limitation that was acknowledged in the study was that there is very little research available on whether video modeling alone is effective. And furthermore, if self-evaluation is more effective than instructor evaluation and feedback. We also want to kind of look at more of a focus with the development of clinical professionals, as that's an area that there's a lot of findings that are more current. Hasimovich, he looked at the effect of clinician feedback versus video assessment from instructors. The purpose of the article was to assess student self-evaluation abilities during an end of the year communication skills examination. So the students were expected to rate their performance, and their score was then compared to an evaluation that was completed by the instructor to compare. So this article presents the issues that are there with the comparison between self-assessment versus the assessment from the instructor. The results actually determined that there was no significant differences between the 2 groups. And they also go in to discuss that feedback is a really important aspect of this, and that is also seeming to be a factor in keeping those accuracy rates down, that there is a certain amount of feedback given to students and professionals. So in conclusion, this article determined that clinician feedback was just as accurate as was student and participant evaluations. And Jennifer is going to go ahead and continue on to some of the other articles that we utilized to study.
I'm sorry, could you not hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay. The first article by Mort was on first-year pharmacy students and self-assessment. And what they did is self-assess prior to a video recording and then after a video recording. And what they found is that the students overestimated their performance by 62.1% on average. And my graphs, as you will see eventually, are a perfect example of this. I overestimated on my assessments in the beginning, and then my performance was lower than what I had assessed. The second article on Hanley discussed the importance of feedback for self-assessment and how feedback is necessary to improve self-assessment through video modeling. In conclusion, video modeling and self-assessment have proven to be valuable tools in many areas in the professional field, educational, even for simple things such as functional living skills. So more research needs to be done as far as functional living skills with students with ASD. Basically, the information and the articles that we researched were all on professional and educational environments and settings. And through research, it has been proven effective for video modeling and self-assessment to be utilized to increase task accuracy. The article that we chose to discuss and reproduce was the effects of video self-evaluation and skill acquisition with yoga poses. And Chantel is going to go into that article for us.
I'm going to be discussing the methods of our study. The participants in this setting were the 5 of us, ages 31, me, Olivia's 25, Pedro's 29, Andrea's 29, and Jennifer's 43. All 5 of us did not have previous experience with yoga, and we were all interested in learning yoga poses. All participants were injury-free at the beginning of the study, and the study was conducted in each of our homes. All of the participants did not practice yoga outside of the experimental sessions. The materials included in our study were a laptop with video capabilities or a video camera, a timer, and a yoga mat or designated place to practice our poses. We also use highly rated yoga videos found on YouTube in place of a yoga instructor. The target behaviors included 3 yoga poses. The first pose was tree pose, which is a balancing pose in which a person stands on one foot and raises their arms. The second pose was warrior 2 pose, which is a stretching pose in which a person positions themselves with their arms and legs spread apart. The last pose was downward facing dog, which is a stretching pose where a person distributes their weight across their hands and feet. Our data collection method, our data was collected by using a score sheet that assessed the accuracy of each pose. The score sheet was based off of the task analysis that our group created after we viewed the YouTube yoga videos. The percent correct was calculated by dividing the number of correct steps by the number of total steps, correct and incorrect, in the pose. Olivia is going to discuss further.
For treatment fidelity, the participants individually scored each other's videos. One participant then calculated the percentage of agreement between the participants. IOA data was taken during 50% of the intervention sessions. If treatment integrity fell below 80%, retraining of how to score the steps of each pose occurred. The retraining was not necessary for us. The method for calculating IOA was trial by trial. The formula for trial by trial IOA is the number of trials in agreement divided by the total number of trials, and then multiply that by 100. Our baseline procedure was that participants collected baseline data after they completed all 3 yoga poses. They first watched instructional videos of a yoga instructor completing the poses. After watching the video once, the participants recorded themselves holding the poses for at least 30 seconds each. They sent the video to a fellow participant for evaluation. The poses were scored, but no feedback was provided to the participant who was doing the poses. The intervention took place in each participant's home. Intervention data was taken through video self-evaluation. The participants viewed their video immediately after completing the poses and used the task analysis and score sheet to score each step of the pose. If a participant did not have a score above 80% for a pose after the last intervention session, so session 8, another level of intervention was used. The intervention was video feedback from a fellow participant through Google Hangouts. After receiving feedback, the participant would complete another intervention session. Video feedback was not necessary for any of the participants, as no participant had a final intervention session score below 80%. 2 weeks after the last intervention session, a maintenance check was to be completed. I am now going to share the graphs that we have all done. Can it be seen?
I do not see them.
Oh, there they are.
Yes.
Does everyone else see them? Oh, there we go.
Yes.
Yes. Thank
One-
you. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go over my baseline first data point and then the fourth session. And then for the interventions, I'm going to go over the first and last data point as well. For the tree pose, my baseline, my first session, I was able to achieve 33% accuracy and then 50% accuracy on the final baseline session. During my intervention phase, 50% was during the first session and then achieved 100% during the last session. Warrior 2, baseline, first session, 14%, and the fourth session, 71%. Warrior 2 intervention was 71% for the first intervention session and 100% for the last. And finally, downward dog, my baseline, the first session achieved 67% and then 83% for the final, and intervention 83% and 100% for the final intervention session. And while completing this activity, it was interesting going through the baseline as I really, felt a lack of direction, having never done poses like this before. And as soon as we institute the treatment, I could automatically feel a sense of direction and knowing where I was going with the poses. And there's an obvious trend that my sessions improved as I started implementing the treatment. Improved really quickly, and we can see that across the board in all of our data.
Figure 2 is my data graphs. In tree pose, for my first baseline data point, I achieved 50% correct steps of the poses, and in my ending baseline was 67%. I started the intervention phase at 83%, and I also ended at 83%. I did hit 100% in there, but not on the last intervention phase, or last intervention session. In Warrior 2 pose, I started baseline at 57% and ended at 71%. And in the intervention, I started at 86% and also ended at 86%. And then in Downward Dog, I started at 67% and ended at 83%. And in intervention, I started at 83% and ended at 100%. I also thought it was interesting while doing these poses that something I had not considered with setting up the self-evaluation was the timing or the setting of the video camera. And several times I had to redo sessions because my video camera did not actually have my whole body in the frame because I did not have enough space between it. So it's an interesting problem that I did not expect to face in our study.
This is my graph for tree pose. My starting for baseline was 33%, and my ending for baseline was 50%. Once we started the video self-evaluation intervention, my starting point was 66%, and my ending point was 100%. For Warrior 2, I started baseline at 43%, and I also ended at 43%. I had like a little bit of a jump on my third data point, but then I decreased again for my final one. After the video intervention, I started my starting baseline, or my starting point of the video self-evaluation was 71%, and my ending point was 100%. For Downward Dog, my starting baseline point was 33%, and my ending baseline point was 43%. My starting intervention point for Downward Dog was 67%, and my ending intervention point for Downward Dog was 100%. Something that I had a difficult time with throughout the poses was the timing for holding all of our poses for at least 30 seconds. That was really difficult for me during the baseline phase. And after our video self-evaluation intervention, I was able to hold the poses for longer, which is why my data points all show an increase on all 3 of my yoga poses. And that's it.
I believe the next one is mine. For the first one, the tree pose, my initial baseline data was 67%. My number 4 baseline was 67% as well. The first intervention was 50%, which went down dramatically. And then my intervention, the last one, was 67%. In Warrior 2 pose, my first baseline was 43%. My last baseline was 100%. My first intervention, 72%. My last intervention was 86%. And then in my Downward Dog pose, the first baseline was 67. The last baseline was 67 as well. My first intervention was 83%, and my last intervention was 100%. What I found most interesting about this is my original self-assessment was much higher than what transpired after the intervention. Kind of like the same thing as was with the pharmaceutical students in Mort's article. And what I attribute mine to was that I wasn't feeling well, and I think that is why my scores went down. So I thought that was interesting. And I think like in future studies, they could take into consideration other factors. So when they're looking at students that are in school, you know, do they have other issues going on, such as not feeling well or stress in other situations that could cause these percentages to go down?
All right, I'm going to share my data. Is that okay, everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'll start off with the tree pose. To begin with, I do not have the best balance, so I kind of struggle with this pose. As you can see with my baseline, I started off at 83%, but I just struggled maintaining the poses for 30 seconds. I highlighted here when I scored the lowest, and again, it was just silly mistakes such as balance, I think, was my biggest factor here in this pose. Looking at the warrior pose, I found this pose to be the easiest. As you can see, my baseline scored 86 all across, and when I started intervention, I scored at 100, and I ended up with 102. On the last pose, again, I found this pose to be difficult. As it was mentioned earlier, none of us had any yoga experience. So as you can see, baseline was 83. I had to kind of rewatch the videos a couple of times, actually, just to make sure I was doing it correctly. And when I recorded this, I had a friend of mine record this just because it was kind of difficult to capture everything, as this with this pose, you had to be on the floor. You can see I also scored low on the 67 or on the second intervention, and that's just because I think because my hand gave out and I couldn't hold it 30 seconds. Now I'm going to go into our discussion. Sharing, you did, right? Okay. All right. So as it was mentioned earlier, we try to do our best in order to replicate Downs' 2015 study in assessing video self-evaluation to increase the accuracy of these three common yoga poses that we chose. The procedure has proven to be effective, again, as confirmed earlier, but this procedure has not been evaluated in sports or recreational activities. Therefore, we aim to confirm the findings of the replicated study. It is important to note that improvements viewed by participants would likely function as reinforcers for behavioral changes, and this was confirmed by all participants in the study, but further research is needed to substantiate the findings. We had 5 healthy adults included in our study, and you can see improvement in the percentage of correct steps in our poses with the introduction of the video self-evaluation procedure. The findings also expressed or showed our interest in pursuing this in the future, but more data collection during the intervention phase would have been beneficial to further support our claims. One of the biggest limitations I think we had in our study is we needed to collect more data, but again, due to time constraints, working out everyone's working and school schedule, and the time frame allocated for data collection, it was kind of an issue. So therefore, our results confirmed the effectiveness of only one of the procedures that was used in the original study with the data collected. An intervention that was stated earlier, but not implemented, but in place was video feedback. Yet again, we didn't come to that point, so we did not use this. It is also important to note that the data was only collected for 4 baseline sessions and 4 intervention sessions, and that is something we kind of decided as a team and because due to time constraints. So the replicated study was not able to conduct in the format due to all of this, and so we had to modify some of our methods. The interventions were assessed by a single subject design across behaviors with 5 participants rather than using a multiple baseline design with 2 participants as in the original study. We also, due to time restraints, were not able to conduct maintenance or collect or graph maintenance. In addition, the original study included having the researcher help out the participants in the first 2 initial video self-evaluation phases, and the use of the researcher taught the participants how to use or track their score using task analysis sheet. But what we did was we had a similar procedure in which the yoga videos and pictures were used for the 3 poses in order for us to replicate. And with the use of a task analysis sheet, we kind of explained it to each other during a Google Hangout and made sure that everyone was on the same page. So in addition, our task analysis and procedure protocols were also confirmed by our professor. Future research can focus on implementing this procedure with other novice yoga practitioners and other common yoga poses. Again, we did replicate just the basic common yoga poses. There is poses out there. Future studies should also focus on other recreational activities or sports in order to evaluate its effectiveness. In addition, researchers can analyze the effectiveness of just using task analysis for the acquisitions of yoga poses without the need for video self-evaluation. And in our field, task analysis is very common to use as an effective treatment. It is also important to note that the procedure used in the study, along with marking correct and incorrect responses on the task analysis, provided the participants with immediate feedback. And this was a key component of video self-evaluation that will contribute to its success only if improvements function as reinforcers, which it did in our case. Video immediacy feedback should be analyzed in other sports.
Thank you for listening to our study. Let us know if you have any questions.